So today I'm going to show you how to sow and grow Swede. Now Swede is also known as Rutabaga or Swedish Turnip. Now it dates back to around about the 17th century in Sweden as actually part of the Brassica family, but it's very closely related to the turnip. So today I'm going to try and hopefully tackle some of the issues that I've had in the comments about sowing Swede. Now year after year after year I sow Swede and grow it every year and I have no problems at all, but I was quite shocked to find how many people were messaging me and in other comments and other videos about how many struggles they have growing Swede. So today I'm going to try and tackle some of those issues. So first up is when to sow. Now there are three methods of how to sow Swede. If you're going to sow directly in the soil, then wait until April time, sow it in a small drill, leaving good spacing and then thin out. My advice would be to use about 20 to 30 centimeters in between each seed. So my advice would be to make a long drill, sow a couple of seeds, move along about 20 or 30 centimeters, 30 ideally, sow a couple more, move along and so on. And that works really, really well, and then just remove the other seedlings. But there are other two methods where I use, which I find more successful with, but a lot of people say that Swede don't like having their roots disturbed, but I've never had no issues. Now the second method is to sow it into a small seed tray like this. Wait until they're around about this side, they're about a centimetre or so high, and then I prick them out and then I put them into individual cells like so. So these are called Best of All. This is another variety that I'm sowing, and then these ones are pretty much similar. These are the Marians. They've already been pricked out and put into their individual cells, and I'm doing 15 of those in a container wise 15 cell tray. So that leads me on to the third method, is putting them into a module tray. Now if you put some sifted well drained compost into here, make a small indentation and then put 3 seeds in each cell and then thin out later on. So you remove the 2 weaker seedlings, leave 1 in each cell and then grow them on from here, and then they grow into here, and then later on if you want you can pot them on before you put them out into the garden. So let's do this method now, because even though I do it like this, I'm pretty confident that Swede works for me. But for beginners and people with issues, let's try this module tray method now and let's crack on. So first of all you want to sift your soil. There we go. And then you want to place it all into the module tray. Give it a little firm down. Remove all the air pockets. Now give it a water, let it settle, and then give it a second water. Now this method applies for all brassicas, so it's not just for Swedes at this stage. Now I'm going to use my grow up dibber and make a small little indentation in the middle of each cell. There we go, just like that. And then this variety is called Helena. And like I said, all you want to be doing really is putting about 2 seeds. Now they are quite small seeds, so just be careful. But it doesn't matter if you put a few more than you need. So just pop a few in. Now all you do then is you add a bit of compost on the top, firm them down, and give them another water. And don't forget to label. Job done. And then all you do then is leave these now for about a week or 2 and they should start popping their heads. So that's my 3 varieties of Swede, all sown now at different stages. So hopefully I will get them in stages over summer and winter, but I'll also do another sowing in June ready for later on in the year as well. So job done. So to get an effective germination, you want your seedlings to be germinating between 18 to 24 degrees Celsius or 65 Fahrenheit to 75 Fahrenheit. Now that's the premium temperature, and also you don't want it to go lower than about 10 degrees Celsius outside and or 50 degrees Fahrenheit at night. So, but I found, even though they are pretty much the rules for temperatures, I found that putting them into the polytunnel and sowing them on, they're pretty hardy and they pretty much look after themselves. As you can see now, I've been going down to temperatures as -1 or 2 and they've had no issues at all with that. But that's the premium temperature, so if you want to wait a little bit longer, maybe a few more weeks, you can. So the next question is when to sow. Now I sow in 2 different dates. If you sow between March and April, you'll get a harvest around September, October time. That's my first crop. And then if you sow in about June time, you should get them then harvesting between October, November, December, January and February. So there are 2 different times, but I'm going to be sowing some now, which I already have. I've already done a pile, but I'm going to be doing another sowing now just to show you. But then in later June, I will do another sowing so that I've got another succession of Swedes. So, but most people will just do now March and April time, and then they will carry on through and they can store out in the garden. But I'll talk about storing Swede later on. So I'll discuss now some of the stages of sowing. So like I said, 1 to 2 weeks it'll take to germinate if you're going to put them into cells indoors. If you're sowing them outside directly, it might take another week. And so in week 3, you'll want to be thinning out those seedlings out into the garden. Week 6 to 8, you can either plant them out or you can actually pot them on in the polytunnel, which is what I normally do, or in your greenhouse or at home, as long as it's getting a lot of light. Now I normally pot them on till about the 8-week mark so that they're ready for my last frost. I've got plenty of things to go out in the garden at the same time, so, and they all get netted at the same time as well. So at week 14, you'll now have these massive lush green leaves on the top. And now at week 14, the bulb will start to swell, and then this is when you'll start getting that lovely Swede shape. And from week 20 onwards, you should start getting small Swedes, which you can start harvesting, or if you want to carry on then from week 20 onwards, you'll end up getting bigger Swedes, obviously, the longer you leave them in the ground. But from week 20, you can start harvesting them. Now, I wouldn't advise you to grow all your Swedes and then take them all at that premium size. My advice would be to start taking them smaller from June, July, August onwards. And then you should, because why would you want all your Swedes grown at the same time? You know, take them when they're small, you know, even if you take 2 just to make a roast dinner, because nobody wants all of them at the same time. But if you do to store, that's fine. But I start taking them from June onwards, and then obviously the bigger they get, the less amount I need to take out the bed for a roast dinner. But normally 1 Swede is enough for 1 person from June onwards. Now, I've talked about this already a little bit, but let's talk about spacing. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I had small Swedes, they didn't get very big. It's all down to the spacing. They do like a lot of space, so if you want small Swedes, if there's like a family of 1 or 2, maybe you want to space them about 20 centimeters apart from each other, but ideally you want to be going to about 30 centimeters in between each plant, and you should get these huge big Swedes ready for winter. So pests. Now, there are many pests really for Swedes, so they're an ideal crop to grow. The only ones really are cabbage whites, which will attack the foliage on the top, and flea beetle. Nothing really attacks the root that much, except for slugs a little bit in winter, but that's normally when you've left them in the ground too long, and they become really woody then as well, so you don't really want them. So don't think I'll leave them in there and they'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger, because once they grow bigger than about, you know, this size, you want to be harvesting them because they'll get really woody and tough, and you can steam them and boil them as much as you want and they'll still stay tough as old boots. So my advice would be to grow them to about maybe this size, and then yeah, enjoy them. But like I mentioned, the most common pests for Swede are cabbage whites and flea beetle, so make sure they are netted. A nice fine vegetable netting is perfect for them. Make sure you do that from the time that you plant them. Don't leave it, because cabbage whites will come out and leave little small green caterpillars on the top and they'll eat them. Now you want those leaves because obviously the leaves create chlorophyll, which turns into glucose, which then feeds the root underneath, which just makes it a nice healthy plant for you. So make sure that you do cover them, I promise you. Like in some areas, you might not have many pest issues, but for me, if I have a bit of flea beetle damage on the top, that's not so bad because the root underneath is what you're eating. But ideally, you want to be trying to cover them and protect them as much as you can. So let's talk about where the best place to grow your Swede. Now, it's best grown in an alkaline soil, free draining but moisture retentive, with plenty of sun, but you don't want that soil to dry out too much. Now, I know that sounds like, where do I put all these? But having those nets over does help a little bit as well, gives it a little bit of shading. I tend to grow them maybe a row or 2 from my runner beans, because that gives it a little bit of shade in the afternoons but gets a lot of morning sun. So just think about where you're going to grow them. It's pretty much, you can grow them next to your cabbages, your broccolis, your cauliflower, all in the brassica family. And just like most brassicas, they prefer an alkaline soil. Now if your soil is slightly acidic, you can be adding lime into the soil around the planting area. That'll help the root as well, because they don't want to be growing in like quite acidic soil, so you can actually adjust the pH by adding in the lime into the soil. So feeding Swede. Now normally I would say one thing for one and one for another, but I found bloodfish and bone works, seaweed feed works, and also chicken manure pellets. Now I just sprinkle a little bit around the root area after about a month or two of them being in the ground, and just let the rain do their job and wash them all in. But you can actually take a little bit of soil away, bury it underneath if you want, and then cover it over if you've got issues with like foxes and whatnot. But just put a little bit around the area and let the rain do the job for you. So one of the issues I noticed in the comments on my videos is that a lot of people were saying they were getting long, spindly, carrot style Swede roots rather than the big spherical Swedes that we all know. Now this is just a theory of mine, and because I've actually experienced it myself, is the only thing different about the Swede over to the other brassicas is if you get a leggy seedling, normally you can plant that seedling a little bit deeper in cabbages, in broccoli, collie, kales and whatnot, and they're forgiving over it. But if you do it with a Swede, I found if the leggier the seedling, then you will end up with these long spindly Swedes. So make sure that you prick them out and you grow them on with the right amount of light, and make sure they're quite short, stubby little seedlings. Like I've shown you already earlier, you want them to be like that. If they're really long and spindly because they haven't had much light because you've sown them indoors, start again, throw them away. Do not even attempt it, because you will end up with that end result. You can eat them, you can still eat them and all, but you won't be getting those big round Swedes that will store really well. So make sure you get short and stubby seedlings. Now there are quite a few varieties that you could try now, but my three main ones are Helena, Best of All and Marion. Now I grow those every year and I find that I have no problems with those. So these are the three that I recommend that you try. But like I said, there are quite a few out there for you to try if you don't want to use my recommendation, but Helena is my favourite. And storing. Now there is a couple of ways you can store Swede, and one of them is a bit of a lazy way, which I'll tell you in a second. But first of all, when you harvest them, you can either actually just take them out of the ground, cut the foliage off the top, shake off as much soil as you can, and leave them dry outside for a couple of days if there's no rain planned. Or if not, keep them in your greenhouse or your polytunnel, and then remove the remaining amount of soil, and they'll actually store between 2 to 3 months in a nice cool room, just like that on its own, in a box. Store them a little bit like potatoes, but I like to do the other method, which is I like to harvest them and then I like to chop them up, dice them and put them into freezer bags and pop them straight in the freezer. And then when I need them, then I just grab a handful and start steaming them or boiling them or roasting them, mashing them. There's so many ways that you can use that Swede. And the other method is what I do most of the time is I just leave them in the ground. As long as they're not getting too big, they'll be fine. They'll store really well in the ground over winter, and then I just pull up the ones I want. But once they become too big, they're very woody, tough, so they're wiped out then as well. You may as well just put them in the compost to eat and hope they'll rot down by 2045. So I hope this has helped you and given you enough advice for you to get a successful crop of Swedes this year. Good luck, keep me informed in the comments, and fingers crossed you all. I'm Danny and this is Grow Up.